There is something that every student of history, every scholar of international law, every careful reader of democratic theory must eventually reckon with when a government that calls itself the leader of the free world negotiates not with reason, not with consistency, not with the moral authority of its stated values, but instead, with the blunt instrument of military blockade and an ever shifting list of maximalist demands, then the question we must ask ourselves is no longer about the other side. The question becomes, what exactly are we becoming? And that brings us to what Al Jazeera is reporting today. And this story, my friends, is not simply a diplomatic dispatch from some distant corner of the world. This story is a mirror, and it is being held up directly to the face of American foreign policy right now in real time. And what it is showing us is not pretty. Iran has rejected participation in a second round of peace talks with Washington, and according to Iran's official state news agency, IRNA, the reasons Tehran has cited are not vague, they are not emotional, they are not the ramblings of an irrational adversary, they are documented, they are specific, and frankly, when you lay them out one by one, they are damning. Iran's position, as conveyed through Pakistani mediators, is this: Washington has presented excessive demands. Washington has set unrealistic expectations. Washington has engaged in constant shifts in its stance. Washington has repeatedly contradicted itself. And then, on top of all of that, Washington has maintained a naval blockade of Iranian ports, which Tehran considers a direct breach of the ceasefire that both sides only just agreed to. Let that sink in for a moment. A ceasefire was agreed, and while that ceasefire was technically still in effect, the United States, according to Iran's accounting, maintained a naval blockade. A blockade, ladies and gentlemen, is not a neutral act. Under international law, a naval blockade is classified as an act of war. It is the same instrument that John F. Kennedy deployed against the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, and Kennedy himself understood that calling it a blockade was so legally provocative, so legally explosive, that his administration deliberately chose to call it a quarantine instead to avoid the full legal weight of what a blockade actually means under the laws of war. The Trump administration today has no such linguistic caution. They call it what it is, they are proud of it, and they are maintaining it while simultaneously demanding that Iran come to the table to negotiate peace. Think about what that is. You are being asked to negotiate your own surrender while your ports are being strangled, while your economy is being suffocated, while your ships cannot move, and while a military force vastly superior to your own circles your waters. And then when you push back, when you say the conditions are not right, when you say the demands keep shifting, when you say we need a legal framework before we proceed, you are told by the most powerful man on earth that you have chosen the pursuit of a nuclear weapon over peace. You are told that you are the obstacle. You are told that you are the problem. Now, I want to be precise here. I am not standing here tonight as an advocate for the Iranian government. The Islamic Republic has its own long and complicated and deeply troubling history of repression of its own people, of support for armed proxies across the region, of hostility toward democratic values that we hold and that we defend. None of that is in question. None of that is being erased. But here is what democracy requires of us. Democracy requires that we hold our own government to the same standards of law, of consistency, and of moral coherence that we demand from others, and right now, by those standards, Washington is failing badly. Let us go back a little. Let us give this the historical context it deserves, because this story does not begin this week. This story does not begin with the ceasefire. This story has roots that go back decades, roots that run deep into the soil of broken promises, violated agreements, and American decisions that planted the very seeds of the mistrust we are watching bloom into crisis right now. In 2015, the United States of America, along with five other world powers, negotiated and signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. It was, by every serious assessment, by every arms control expert, by every international inspector at the International Atomic Energy Agency, a working agreement. Iran was complying. The inspectors confirmed it. The enrichment was being capped. The pathways to a nuclear weapon were being blocked. It was not perfect. No deal is ever perfect, but it was working. And then in 2018, Donald Trump tore it up unilaterally, without cause, in terms of Iranian noncompliance, without the support of America's European allies, without a replacement deal. He simply walked away, reimposed sanctions, and handed the hardliners inside Iran the single greatest propaganda gift they had received in a generation, because now Iran's supreme leader could stand before his people and say, "This is what American promises are worth. This is what happens when you trust Washington. You get sanctions back, you get maximum pressure, you get abandoned." And now in 2026, we are watching the sequel, and the sequel is in many ways worse, because now there is not just a broken diplomatic agreement, now there is a shooting war, a war in which the United States and Israel launch strikes on Iranian territory, a war in which more than 4,000 people have been killed overwhelmingly in Iran and in Lebanon, a war which produced a fragile 2-week ceasefire brokered under enormous pressure by Pakistan, a ceasefire that expires on April 22nd, and with that clock ticking right now, Iran is saying we are not coming back to the table until the conditions are met. According to reporting from multiple sources tonight, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Saeed Khatibzadeh, speaking on the margins of a diplomacy forum in Turkey, made clear that Iran is not there yet. His exact framing was pointed. He said the Americans have not yet abandoned their maximalist position, and Iran wants a framework agreement finalized before any in-person meeting takes place, and Iran has delivered that message through Pakistani mediators with a set of preconditions. First, Washington must fulfill the commitments it already made. Second, Washington must abandon its excessive demands in the talks. Without those two things, Iran says, the negotiations will simply be unproductive. Now let us look at what those demands actually are, because the American side has not exactly been shy about stating them. The Trump administration, according to reporting from Time magazine, proposed a 20-year suspension of Iranian uranium enrichment. Iran countered with 5 years. The United States rejected that. American negotiators want Iran to dismantle its major nuclear enrichment facilities. They want Iran to hand over more than 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, material that Trump himself described as nuclear dust that the U.S. plans to, quote, go in and get, and they want Iran's enriched uranium physically shipped to the United States, not to a neutral third party, not to Russia, which has offered to take it, to the United States, the country that is currently blockading Iranian ports. Iran's deputy foreign minister put it simply, handing enriched uranium to Washington is a non-starter, full stop, and frankly, from a purely logical standpoint, set aside all ideology, set aside all politics, set aside who you root for in this conflict. If a country that just bombed you is now asking you to hand over your most strategically sensitive material to them directly while their navy surrounds your ports, does that sound like a negotiation? Or does that sound like a demand for unconditional surrender dressed up in diplomatic language? Because that is precisely what Trump wrote on March the 6th of this year, before the talks began. He wrote, "There will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender." Those words are not diplomatic. Those words are not the words of a negotiator. Those words are the words of a conqueror. And yet somehow when Iran declines to surrender unconditionally, it is Iran that is portrayed as the obstacle to peace. The American people deserve to understand what unconditional surrender actually means in the context of a sovereign nation. It means the complete dismantlement of all nuclear infrastructure. It means the handover of enriched materials. It means effectively trusting the country that abandoned you in 2018, that bombed you in 2026, and that has blockaded your ports to nevertheless act in good faith with your most sensitive national security assets. No serious diplomat, no serious scholar of international relations, no serious legal mind anywhere on earth would call that a reasonable or achievable or even rational demand, not in the real world, not in this context. And here is what makes it all even more destabilizing. The ceasefire expires on April 22nd, that is, days away, and J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, has confirmed that he is expected to lead any potential second round of negotiations if a meeting can be scheduled before that deadline. Vance, who told Fox News that Iran moved in their direction but not far enough. Vance, who framed it as a grand deal waiting to happen, but only if Iran takes the next step. The framing is always Iran must move. The framing is never we must be consistent, we must be credible, we must be trustworthy. And credibility is the very thing that Iran's parliament member Esmail Kausari cited tonight when he described Washington as not trustworthy. His framing was remarkable. He said Iran will continue to participate in talks not to find agreement but to expose United States behavior when a negotiating party shows up to expose you rather than to deal with you. You have lost something that no military blockade can recover. You have lost legitimacy. There is a word in diplomacy that matters more than any weapon, more than any aircraft carrier, more than any nuclear capability. That word is trust, and trust cannot be coerced. Trust cannot be blockaded into existence. Trust cannot be demanded by a 20-year timeline or a non-starter ultimatum. Trust is built through consistency. It is built through honoring what you sign. It is built by not walking away from agreements that are working. It is built by not imposing fresh sanctions 4 days after suspending them. It is built by not publicly writing that you want unconditional surrender and then claiming in the same breath that you want a deal. And here is the thing that should keep every citizen of this democracy up at night. If the ceasefire expires on April 22nd and there is no second round of talks and there is no framework and the blockade continues and the demands remain maximalist, then the option that comes next is not diplomacy. The option that comes next is war, renewed war, with a nation of nearly 90 million people, with a nation that has already, according to CNN reporting, been rebuilding access to its underground missile bases during the ceasefire, a nation whose IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, has stated clearly that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed until the United States stops blockading Iranian ports, the strait through which 1/5 of the world's oil trade passes every single day. The economic consequences of a breakdown are not hypothetical, they are not abstract, they are being felt right now in American gas prices, in global markets, in the supply chains of every nation on earth. Trump's own aides have privately told CNN that the administration is not keen to resume the war precisely because it has led to rising prices for Americans and is broadly deeply unpopular. And yet the public posture, the maximalist demands, the unconditional surrender, the refusal to offer consistency, the maintenance of the blockade, all of it points in exactly the wrong direction. This is what happens when foreign policy is conducted not as statecraft but as performance. When the audience you are playing to is not the international community, not the negotiating table, not the sweep of history, but a domestic base that wants to see strength defined as dominance rather than wisdom, when the metric of success is not did we achieve a durable peace, but rather did we look like we won. Democracy at its best demands more than performance. It demands accountability. It demands that when our government sets conditions, it must keep them, that when our government signs a ceasefire, it must honor it, that when our government goes to a negotiating table, it must go with the intention of negotiating, not simply of performing. And when these standards are not met, it falls to a free press, to an informed citizenry, to legislators with the courage to ask hard questions, to hold the mirror up and to say loudly and clearly, this is what is being done in our name, and we have a right and a responsibility to demand better. The clock on this ceasefire is ticking. April 22nd is coming, and the question that will define not just this administration, but this moment in American history is a simple one. Is Washington capable of choosing the credibility of genuine diplomacy over the theater of maximum pressure? Or are we watching in real time the architecture of another catastrophic, avoidable, unnecessary war being built brick by brick, demand by demand, contradiction by contradiction right before our eyes? That is the question, and history will not forgive the answer if we get it wrong.